The following podcast is a Super Network production with your hosts, Super Marcey.
Yeah, definitely a step up, but, that could be perhaps maybe this script just worked. Maybe it was just the fact that it had Eric Roberts being all Eric Robertsy.
The terrible Australian Bede Jermyn.
Why doesn't the vampire just leave? It's not like that he's being held there against his will. And we've seen him a few times on top of built-on roofs. Like, why doesn't he just piss off and leave?
It contains coarse and explicit language.
The housemate dude, I was like, why the f*** are you dressed like Constantine? That was just weird out the whole time.
Mature themes.
It's your wedding day and everyone always has cold feet and they sort of... This is kind of more the extreme version of that kind of scenario. Like, should I marry a serial killer or not?
And potential spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
For more, please visit supermarcey.com and show your support at patreon.com/thesupernetwork. Enjoy the show. Hello everyone and welcome to Podcasters of Horror, the podcast where we look at TV shows and films that are horror anthologies. So far we've covered the Showtime series Masters of Horror and the short-lived Fear Itself. I am your host, Super Marcey, and welcome to episode 21, where we will begin our dive into the sci-fi series Channel Zero, starting with Season 1, Candle Cove, for this episode. I am joined by my regular co-host, the terrible Australian, Bede Jermyn. Hello, Bede. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Marcy. How are you?
Doing well, thanks, Bede. Very excited that we start a brand new journey here on Podcasters of Horror now that we've finished Fear Itself.
Indeed, and I'm quite excited that every 2 months we're going to be covering Channel Zero. It's an anthology show that I've been hearing about for years, and some say that it's one of the best current ones out there, even though it has already finished its run already, but it's still, even years after its cancellation, it's still getting a lot of reprisal from a lot of people, and I'm very excited to kind of finally dive into it for this show.
Me as well. It is one that I haven't seen and I have wanted to see, so that's why I picked it for this podcast. We are not alone to discuss Channel Zero Candle Cove, however. We have a first-time guest for Podcasters of Horror. However, this person did join us earlier this year on an episode of the Super Podcast. So everybody, please welcome the one and only Derek Smith to Podcasters. Hello, how are you, Derek?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys for having me again.
Thank you for joining us for a bit of a horror anthology season.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you guys about it. I really enjoyed my first run through of the series, and it was great getting to catch back up with it. So
yes, unlike Bede and myself, you had previously seen Channel Zero, and of course the season we will be discussing today with Candle Cove, and Bede and I, it was a first time watch, so it's very, very exciting for all of us.
yeah, definitely. I had a chance to catch it on its first run on SyFy. Actually watched the first 3 episodes the day they ran, and then ended up holding off on the last couple episodes and binged them. And actually, while rewatching them, I actually did the exact same thing. I gave each of the first 3 a few days in between, and then I binged the last 3 episodes again. So I had to make sure that followed suit with my first initial watch. So.
Excellent. And with our guests, we normally like to just throw them into the deep end a little bit, but maybe not as bad this time. Because we've previously covered on this show Masters of Horror and Fear Itself, have you seen or were you a fan of those shows?
What I was able to see of Masters of Horror, yes, I really did appreciate quite a few the episodes that I was able to see. Also, really dug the soundtrack. I had the double CD soundtrack where it was just packed full of a whole bunch of metal and new metal artists and everything of that time. So that was really fun. Fear Itself, unfortunately, I have not had a chance to watch, but I'm definitely gonna check it out when I get a chance soon. So
Excellent. And as a whole, do you enjoy the horror anthology format?
Yeah, it definitely gives you the opportunity to get a lot of story packed in, especially in the anthology movies. We definitely get a lot more of the shorts tied together with that wraparound. Of course, you always have a lot of misses with the hits as well, but in the TV series it doesn't seem to be as much. But still, I mean, you have like with the American Horror Story, you have some seasons that are a little bit better than others, and
Yeah.
and I'm sure Channel Zero, while I've only seen the first season, I'm sure there may be others that don't hit nearly as well, but we'll definitely have to see coming up on that.
Indeed, indeed. Bede, do you have anything you wanted to add or ask Derek before we dive right in?
One of the things, like, I think what's interesting about a show like Channel Zero compared to other anthology films and TV shows out there is that it kind of takes the sort of American Horror Story approach where instead of having one episode be a standalone story, like they have a story that's stretched out for an entire season, and then the following season they switch it up and tell a completely new story. And I think that's one of the things, I think that sort of brings a freshness to the anthology kind of subgenre of film and TV by having like a season long story. And from what I understand, like, even though there are a lot of other shows out there that do this kind of format, like I said, American Horror Story being another one, I think with Channel Zero, based on the reputation it had prior to you and I, Marcy, sat down to watch this show, it was definitely one of the more consistently stronger anthology horror shows because each season just sort of was just as good as the previous one.
Yes, and we'll definitely be getting to that in future episodes for the other seasons. And what I think, at least for me, that sets it apart a little bit is that it is only 6 episodes per season. Hence, we decided to do 1 season per episode for this. And so that's kind of a bit shorter, and they're very tight episodes, about 45 minutes or so. And that, again, sets it apart from something like American Horror Story, where the seasons were a bit longer as well. So very excited to discuss Candle Cove with you both today.
Indeed, and I suppose we could get straight to it and talk about the very first season of the show,
Yeah.
which of course is Candle Cove.
When I was a kid, I did some things too.
Let's just get this clear. You actually saw it in 1988.
Do you really think that he just happened to find her out there? This is just the beginning.
Kids are hurting someone!
Everything that's happening now, everything that happened in 88 is back. What do you want?
Yes, so just all the little bits of background info. Channel Zero first aired in 2016 on SyFy, as previously mentioned, and we are discussing Season 1, Candle Cove, which ran for, as previously mentioned, 6 episodes, and all the seasons, I believe, were based on different creepypasta stories, with Candle Cove obviously being a creepypasta story that was by Kris Straub. If I'm pronouncing any names wrong, please forgive me. I'm doing my absolute best. All 6 episodes were directed by Craig William Macneill, and the season stars Paul Schneider, Fiona Shaw, Luisa de Oliveira, I think that's how you say it, Natalie Brown, Shaun Benson, Luca Villacis, Abigail Pniowsky, and Marina Stephenson Kerr. The plot, which I am reading from Wikipedia: a child psychologist returns to his hometown to determine if his brother's disappearance is somehow connected to a series of similar incidents and a bizarre children's television series, Candle Cove, that aired at the same time. So, seeing as Derek has seen it before and me and Bede have not, Bede, why don't you kick us off with your initial thoughts on this season, and then we'll throw it over to Derek.
Indeed. I wasn't sure what to expect when I sat down to watch Candle Cove. Like, I knew kind of the basic premise that it was this sort of horror story about a children's TV show. And that's kind of really what I knew. And also, like, I've seen the design of the season's most creepiest creature, which I believe is named the Tooth Child, which is probably one of the most unsettling designs for a monster I've seen in quite a while, because the whole creature is just covered from head to toe in teeth, children's teeth, and it's just wrong on so many levels, but that's beside the point. So sitting down to watch it, I was definitely very hooked from the very beginning, because the very first episode kind of starts you off with our main character, played by Paul Schneider, who is, we know that he's a child psychologist and he's being interviewed for this TV show. But as sort of this TV show is going on, we kind of start to notice that there's something off. We're not sure what it is at first, but as the kind of the interview goes on, it just slowly starts to get creepier and creepier. And it kind of really just kind of sets the tone for what the whole series is going to be. Because what I really loved about Candle Cove as a whole is that it's a very atmospheric show, but it's a very subtle show in terms of how it approaches its scares and also its more terrifying moments. But even just how it's even made has a very kind of low-key, subtle approach. Like, there's no kind of showiness going on here in terms of like how it approaches its filmmaking. Like, it kind of dials everything back to a much more believable level that as you're watching it, you get more hooked as the story progresses, because since it's going for that sort of more believable kind of approach in terms of its world building and that, it just makes it a much more creepier experience from beginning to end.
Definitely. Derek, what were your initial thoughts on Candle Cove?
Well, with the show, I was definitely impressed with how it hit the ball, right out the park, right off front, where it's just like immediately you got that unnerving feeling as you're listening to that interview, and you're immediately like, something is not right here. And hey, is this actually happening? It just immediately right off the bat, that there's just that little tiny it's right on the fence of whether it could be reality, a dream, nightmare, or whatnot. And of course, I was a fan of the show Parks and Rec, and the first season, which is like the least favorite season of everybody that's a fan of that show. The love interest, Mark Brendanowicz, was actually played by the same character as Mike Painter. And so it was interesting seeing, this failed love interest now all of a sudden in this creepy ass show. So it was like Leslie Knope would not approve of what he's getting down to in dealing with in regards to this. So, but no, I absolutely had a blast, and it immediately sets the tone perfectly just within the first few minutes, and then it just amps up from there.
Definitely. I do agree with what you have both said. And yeah, I kind of wanted to keep myself in the dark as much as possible about the actual plot and what it was about. I just had seen like the tooth creature, the Tooth Child, which freaked me out, and that's kind of why I was very hesitant to watch it. Anything to do with teeth freaks me out. I don't like it. I really don't. And there is an episode of Teen Titans Go that deals with teeth, and I've seen it the once. I could binge watch that show religiously without fail. That episode I cannot watch. I just don't. All the stuff with the teeth and crunching, nah. It's just very, very sensitive to me, and I'm very just like, teeth. But yeah, like, as you said, the show really hooks you in as it introduces the main character of Mike on that TV show, and you kind of are unsure what's going on. And as you said, Bede, things do kind of feel dialed back a little bit. It's trying to be very reality based as well as being kind of supernatural. And I feel like the color of it was dialed back a little bit, but at certain points where you really needed a bit more color, they added that in, which I really liked. And I thought overall they really got the cast well. Like, everybody I felt was cast very well for the characters they're playing. And we do get a sense of this small town, who Mike is, what they've been through. And as the mystery kind of unfolds about what happened to Mike's twin brother Eddie, because we see that through flashbacks, and how it relates to this very mysterious show Candle Cove, and that certain people seem to remember this show but not everybody does, and somehow it's come back, and there's all these little links that you kind of need to tug at these threads to find out what's going on. I really liked that, and I did get sort of vibes of like It, with the flashbacks to childhood to present day kind of thing, but also the very surrealness of something like Twin Peaks a bit in there as well. But yeah, like, I was very impressed by the show. There was definitely some unsettling moments, and I feel like it was very grounded by a script that worked, I think, very well for the most part, and also the really good performances from its cast. But, you know, we can kind of get more into the nitty-gritty of it. Specifically, let's discuss Candle Cove itself, which is a puppet-esque show that the characters saw as kids, and then it's come back. I don't know if I would have been that interested in watching this show, but then I look back at the stuff I used to watch at that age. Maybe Candle Cove was probably a bit too tame for me then. I don't know.
Well, one of the things I like about the design of Candle Cove, the show within, Channel Zero, is that it feels like a show that could have come out from the 70s or 80s in terms of how it's designed, even though, it's use of puppets, and marionettes, but it does feel very genuine to like shows that came around at that period. And also when you watch it, like, you think, oh, it's like a innocent kids TV show, but then as an episode goes along, it just gets creepier and creepier and more sinister. And there's also kind of these surreal subliminal images that kind of pop up throughout these episodes every time you watch them. And it just adds another sort of unnerving feeling to it. And I do like the fact that, because one of the big main thrusts of this whole season is, at first, like, when Mike comes back to town and he meets all of his friends that he knew as kids, and when they talk about Candle Cove, like, oh yeah, I remember that show and stuff like that. It does feel very genuine to, like, sometimes even when you and I, Marcey, hang out and we talk about TV shows we used to watch as kids and remember how weird and surreal they are.
Yeah.
Like, couldn't even possibly believe that a show like that would have existed.
Yeah, I mean, we can be like, hey, do you remember the trapdoor? And it's like, why? How was that a kid's show? That was kind of terrifying. Like I said, a lot of the stuff we watched, and by the way, we were younger than the kids in this show were.
Oh, yeah.
That was something that I found kind of funny, because I felt like at that age, you're probably not going to want to watch a marionette show. I feel like you would have been a lot younger, but, it is what it is.
Well, and I feel a little left out because in the States, we didn't have as many of like puppet and stuff, puppet shows and stuff like that in the 80s. There was stuff in like the 70s and stuff like that, but then that stuff all kind of started dying out in our area. So we didn't really have any of those creepy shows. And I've seen stuff from Britain and from Australia now that was, from around that time. And I'm like, oh my God, I would have been absolutely horrified if I had watched that as a kid. So I feel a little left out in that case.
Yeah, because we had a lot of British stuff growing up on the ABC channel, the Australian broadcasting, whatever it's called. And we had things like, but there was also kids stuff on the other channels, like, what was that show, The Book Place? And it was just they go into, it's like they're in a library or a bookstore, but the puppet, which was the bookworm, was one of the most unnaturally looking creepy worm things. And I'm like, how was that endearing when we were children? That worm would have looked great in Candle Cove, I'm just saying.
Well, I was just about to say, Marcy, like, out of all the creepy characters that were on Australian TV during the 80s and 90s, one character that could easily have fitted into, like, the Candle Cove show was the character of EC from Lift
Oh,
Off.
God. Yeah. Oh, and that was an Australian show.
Yeah, and I guess for those out there who have not aware of Liftoff, basically the character of EC was like this doll that was alive, and all these kids kind of were best friends with. But the thing is, the design of the doll is so creepy because the EC's head has no eyes, no mouth, no nose, no ears, nothing. It's just a plain doll's head with no facial features or anything on it. It is absolutely terrifying. And yet, for some reason, as a kid, I loved that show. So
I just Googled it, and oh my lord. Yeah, that is horrifying.
I feel like that doll
was on a regular TV show for kids.
Oh, yeah.
And we all loved it. We all used to love it. And EC, he would look too creepy for Candle Cove. That doll. Like, if you've never heard of what me and Bede are talking about, look up Lift Off EC and you'll see this freaking just creepy looking kids doll. And EC actually stands for every child. So you were supposed to picture yourself as the doll going on those adventures. Mm-hmm.
That is horrifying.
It is.
Just absolutely. Yeah, I don't think SyFy would have even dared to have gotten that far with it.
They would have cancelled the show right there if EC as a character featured in the show. They would be like, this would be too scary for people.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
But I think what's interesting, though, because like I'm reading up more about the original Candle Cove story, but I think what's interesting about Creepypastas is like how they're sort of written isn't just like, you know, like a Stephen King or a Clive Barker type of story. How they're basically written are done up as if these were like true stories that actually happened. And then kind of going into reading up a little bit of information on Candle Cove, the story, is that basically it kind of starts off as like this thread on the internet and people kind of discussing about when they were kids, they saw this show Candle Cove, and it's them all like reminiscing about specific moments and episodes. And then, of course, people talk about like, oh, how creepy it is, like what we're doing right now on this very show. And then, of course, it ends with kind of the twist of the story, which we find out I believe around the first or second episode, is like you see all the kids in the town watching this show, both in the flashbacks and also in the present day scenes, and they're watching the show. And then, of course, like Mike, played by Paul Schneider, says to his mum, played by Fiona Shaw, like, do you remember that show Candle Cove? And she would be like, well, yeah, you talk about it, but every time you guys would sit down to watch it, there was nothing but static on the TV. Which kind of adds another creepy thing. And that's how the original story kind of ends. Again, it's just that whole creepy feeling. And it's just, and again, it does feel like, oh yeah, this could be a story that you've heard in real life.
Yeah, and that's what I think is kind of clever with Creepypastas. While I don't totally understand it or get it, or it's for me, it's kind of like it's been more sort of the generation after us. It's their version of an urban legend, where we would share these stories like, did you hear about, you know, there was apparently this real thing where there was this couple, blah, 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 and then there was a hook left in the car door, or, you know, all those kinds of things. And that's what I kind of think's interesting and makes it work to an extent, where creepypastas are more internet online based, where urban legends really went from ear to ear back in the day. Yep. And by the time we but by the time we were kind of more like getting towards our teenage years, we had access to the internet and we could see like collected stories of urban legends and kind of delve into that a bit more, which I kind of find more of an interesting thing with a creepypasta. But I did actually read this a few years ago about, because I had just heard Candle Cove and I didn't quite realize it was like a creepypasta at the time. I think I did, but just sort of reading that initial thing, I'm like, this is actually kind of creepy-ish stuff, and it sort of reminds you of like that whole Mandela effect. Like maybe you're just remembering something wrong. That's kind of the feelings I got when I had sort of read that initially. But I do think it's kind of an interesting one to sort of base this story around, because it is kind of creepy that there's this bizarre kids TV show that no one knows anything about, no one can find anything about it, but all these people remember this show, and then by that twist where the mum was like, oh, but that show was like in your heads, you made it up, it's like, oh, this kind of taken a bit of a really unsettling turn.
Yeah, and how the TVs are constantly like turning on while they're unplugged and everything. And the show itself is called Channel Zero because it's on a channel that doesn't exist. It's just playing out there in the ether.
Yeah, which kind of makes you miss like the when you'd be channel surfing and it'd just be static because you only had like several channels access. Like you'd kind of want something weird to just show up one day. Or like a broadcast interrupted, like that weird Max Headroom thing that I don't know what they were doing. A lot of these things kind of remind me about the show itself, but it's interesting how we do just sort of see little bits of the actual show, and more around it is how the people react to it, what goes on around it. Like when Mike sees like his friend's daughter is watching Candle Cove, and then he's like, well, it's starting again. The young girl ends up stabbing her brother. So we realize Candle Cove is associated with violence and potentially the disappearance of 5 kids from the town. It's a very bizarre mystery, that's for sure.
And also, like, even though this is based on a creepypasta, sort of like I was watching, because I had the series on Blu-ray, and I listened to a bit of an interview with the show's creator, Nick Antosca. He was sort of said, like, one of the great things about making this show is basically, like, you can take the creepypasta, but you can kind of do your own thing with it and add so much more to it and add more of the story. And I think, like, having all these kind of different characters and all learning more about their backstories, like who they are as people, and how they kind of fit into this sort of whole Candle Cove mythology really sort of adds a lot to it, to the overall season. And also, like, since I was unfamiliar with both the story and the show, sitting down to watch it, I wasn't exactly sure where the story was going to go. Like, each moment, like in each episode, like how each episode ends feels like the climax to, like, where you would end the story at. But then you realize they have a second or two after that. It's like, oh yeah, there's another episode coming up that's going to continue the story. And also there are many times throughout this whole series where I was just very surprised about where the story just ended up, and like which characters like kind of lived or died. Like sometimes the episode kind of subverts your expectations as well. Like minor characters you'd see in the first episode end up being major characters later on down the track. Like it's one of the interesting things about it, and with Nick and Koska and his fellow writers who wrote who worked on this whole series, they do a good job at, like, again, creating that unsettling fear factor, but also just creating really interesting and compelling characters, and also creating a story that really, like I said, is quite often quite surprising as the series goes on.
Yeah, and Tosca, he also had Don Mancini helping out from the Child's Play series and everything. And so when I found out that Antosca was working with Mancini again for the Chucky series, I was very excited that they were working together for that. And it turned out it was an amazing continuation for that. So yeah, I was definitely happy that they were able to dive into that. But yeah. Oh, go ahead, Pete.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, like, also, like, pretty much their working relationship kind of started during Hannibal, because that's where they first started working together. And there's also a lot of Hannibal influence, a little bit, throughout this whole first season, particularly with the many unsettling and creepy creature designs that feature throughout
they're
the whole
very
show.
unsettling. Like, as we mentioned, the Tooth Child is fucking frightening. But then there's
also,
like the skin thing. I forgot what it's called already.
The skin taker.
Yeah, the skin taker is just.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Although I do have one thing. Maybe I missed something somewhere. Did they ever really explain, like, because we understand that Tooth Child is actually Eddie, the brother who went missing, because we find out Eddie is kind of responsible for everything, but it doesn't really tell us like what was up with the teeth. Like, is this some weird underworld thing where he has to collect enough teeth to be able to get Mike to come into the Candle Cove underworld thing? I didn't know or get if any of that was explained or if it was just there to really creep me the fuck out. I don't know.
I guess that's one thing. I guess if I have any little criticisms about the season is that it doesn't. There are some aspects of like the whole Candle Cove kind of back. Once we know more about it and how Eddie kind of fits into it, like there are definitely some unanswered questions for sure. Like how does all these little things work out? Because we kind of discovered towards the end of the series that basically where Candle Cove came from is from Eddie because was so bullied to the point that he had somehow had the power to create this show.
And have like this controlling power and all
but
these
we
sorts
don't know.
of things.
Yeah, but we don't know if it's like if everything is from him or did the skin taker who's always in the background in this kind of alternative Candle Cove world. Like, is it really the skin taker who's kind of the instigator of everything that's given Eddie the powers so he could have all these children? So, because basically the reason why he's called the skin taker is that all the skin that's over his body is skin from children.
Yeah, so I'm assuming like Eddie kind of has these powers, and then we find out that Eddie was responsible for killing the children when he was a children. So I was assuming that he would have taken them to the underground Candle Cove, whatever we're calling it, that the skin taker is for them. Like, it's not really explained. Now, I don't need everything kind of spoon-fed explained to me, but are we supposed to kind of work this out in the very loose threads that there are, or did they just not bother to kind of explain it? Because I think a little bit more context may have helped just a little bit, but
so I think it's kind of a two-part sacrifice in a way. So you have the teeth for Eddie's corporeal form when he's in there. He is the Tooth Child. He needs those teeth to be able to make himself physical in that body again. And then of course then they take the rest of the kids and that's what the skin taker takes on. So I think it's a two-part sacrifice in that aspect.
Well, that makes probably a bit more sense. But it's not really like explained or
no, it's not. They do try. I think they leave a lot of that up to, because again, back to the whole creepypasta, there's so many things to allow everybody to add in more to the story. Them leaving that open kind of lets us, create those narratives as well. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. But I think, that just sort of maybe confused me a little bit. Whereas a lot of what was going on was so compelling because you have, like, the interesting characters. You go on the journeys with these characters and you see the dynamics and how what happened previously has affected everybody. And I'll be honest, I actually thought the twist, or a twist coming in somewhere, was going to be that Mike was actually Eddie. That there was some kind of switcheroo. Yeah. That's actually where I thought it was going, and then it wasn't. And I was like, oh, okay. But it kind of, because it sort of hints with these things, and it gives you clues, like when Mike says to, I can't remember the name, he's like, oh, well, do you know how to tell me and Eddie apart? Well, he has an extra tooth.
With Jessica,
Yeah, and then we see that he's like, Mike as an adult is now growing this weird tooth because Eddie is planning to kind of take over Mike's physical body because he's been stuck in that Candle Cove thing. As we find out, Mike killed Eddie because he was committing murder, essentially. And he knew that wasn't right. And Eddie kind of, did get these powers where he could have control over people, which he sort of passes on to one of the school teacher who, as we find out, it was a mother of a kid who, one of the kids that ended up dying, and we find out she sacrificed the kid to get the same powers as Eddie. So it's a very fucked up story.
Oh yeah, like there is like outside of Eddie and all the creatures that feature in this whole season, there is of course a human villain character, which is Frances Booth, played by Maria Stephenson Kerr. She's really good in the whole season.
From when we first see her, there is definitely something unsettling about her. And when we find out more, it totally makes sense. And I really liked that about, specifically how they showed her character from before and after we know. But continue.
Oh yeah, but also like how she sort of instigates the children in the town and somehow controlling them to commit these violent acts. And one of the big shocks for me throughout this whole season, and one that I was honestly did not see coming, was because there's the character of Jessica, played by, I should have this up, Natalie Brown, who's kind of like this childhood friend slash girlfriend of Mike when they were kids. And of course, they've kept in contact over the years, and she had her own family and he started his own. But they definitely have a close friendship with each other. And by the end of episode 4, like, it takes a sudden turn. Is like after when they think like they've fixed everything, everything's back to normal, she comes home and sees that there's kids wearing masks and they stab her to death. Which I did not see coming, because you think she's going to be a major character throughout the whole season.
Yeah.
But if anything else, the character who kind of, like I was just saying earlier, who's kind of in the background of some scenes and then becomes a major character is Deputy Amy Welch, played by Luisa D'Oliveira. She's sort of like in the background as like Jessica's husband's Gary's deputy in the background. She's just sort of there and all that. But as the season, like, she's young but full of spunk. And then of course as the season goes on, and then when Gary, basically he and a few of Mike's friends decide, since all this creepy stuff is happening again, they think Mike has something to do with it. So they kidnap Mike, and of course, Amy has to kind of take over as sheriff, and her arc throughout the whole series is actually quite compelling, and she ended up being like one of my favorite characters throughout this whole season.
Absolutely, yeah.
She is really strong. And it was great because she was actually, she grew up in the town with them as well, but she was younger. So she came well after. So she wasn't friends with all of their same friend group, but she was still, there was that familiarity, but a little bit of a distance there as well. But I do got to say, in regards to the kidnapping scene, there's nothing more DIY than vigilante justice in a flipper house.
Right.
That's just like chef's kiss.
Yeah.
That's like the epitome of DIY.
Yeah. And it's so like when you're watching that and they're trying to like interrogate him and stuff, and you're just like, we kind of know what's going on. Just listen to Mike. He's not responsible for this. We know, or we are so sure he's not. And and then it sort of takes these turns and they find out what's going on, and it's just like, geez, this town's a bit fucked, man.
Yeah, but I think the series does a good job. It's like we think from the very beginning, like, being that he's a child psychologist, he's level-headed, he knows what he's doing. But as the series goes on, we find out that he had a psychotic episode before the events of this story, and has actually been out of psych wards throughout the year.
And I would say that was probably due to Eddie and how he can kind of, I don't know, have that twin communication thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and also and his mum, played by Fiona Shaw, who I think is also great throughout.
Oh, she was fantastic. I was so surprised to see her in this. And I think she's a wonderful actress. She just makes me smile, and I don't know why. I just think she's wonderful, and she was very strong here. I felt like the The chemistry between like mother and son was actually very, very strong, and how she kind of relates to everybody in the town because she's been there for so long. It was really good. And she definitely did her best to hide the Britishness. You could kind of hear it a little bit, but I felt like her American accent was pretty good. So I'll give her that. I just think she's wonderful as an actress. So.
And also, she has an arc throughout the whole series. Because at first, she's like wants to know what actually happened to Eddie, because for a while there, they just assumed Eddie was one of the victims, but his body was never found.
Yeah.
Of course, like as the story progresses, as she knows more, it kind of rocks her world a little bit, especially when she finds out that Mike was the one who killed Eddie. But then, as the story progresses and she knows more what's going on, she understands the reasons why that happens, and at the very end is that she too has to kind of stop Eddie. And I think, and how the whole series ends is basically like, as you stated before, Marcey, like Eddie wants to come back to the real world, and the only way he can do it is have Mike come into the alternative evil Candle Cove world, and he can go into Mike's body. And of course, what Mike says to his daughter to tell his mum is basically stop Eddie by any means from getting out in the real world. And what his mum does basically is suffocates him, so that way Mike dies in the real world, and Eddie comes out from Candle Cove and wreak more havoc. Which I think is a beautiful way to end the whole series. And also, it's tragic, but it's kind of very moving as well.
Yeah.
And of course, it brings up full circle of like what Mike did as a child to his mum having to do the same thing.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And it's very tragic, and it's very emotional, because he obviously said to his daughter, like, my body is going to have to die so Eddie doesn't get out. And, you know, Marla, the mum, sort of has to make that ultimate sacrifice and choice that she now will lose both her sons. But I feel like Mike being with Eddie in that alternate reality world, he kind of has more control, that he can stop Eddie from causing more havoc, as we see like at the end with Lily, Mike's daughter, is drawing like her and her dad in that area, and then Candle Cove starts on the TV and we see Mike switch the TV off, but we understand Mike is not alive. So I feel like that's kind of Mike doing what he can to keep Eddie under control, and I kind of thought that was a very interesting little scene, and kind of bringing everything full circle. And hopefully, you know, Eddie's not going to wreak havoc any longer.
Notice Mike doesn't say a word during that. He just gets up and turns off. Yeah. Two things with that. So Marla, definitely with her arc was amazing. When she's looking outside while Mike is talking with Lily, when they first find Lily, and when she's looking, and it flashes back, and she's looking at Mike talking to Eddie. Like, she knows that Eddie is in Lily that whole time. And so she picked up, she knew that because she had that tight bond with her child. She knew, you know, this is my grandchild, but my own son is in there. So that was amazing. I love that aspect. And then the second thing is the use of the whispers, that secret, that was such a great way of narratively keeping the story going and getting those pieces pushed along without like ruining everything for us. Like it still allowed us as the audience to be really kind of shocked, like, oh, that's what they were really going for. Oh my gosh.
And I gotta say though, and this is kind of what blew my mind towards the end of the series, like we got Eddie and Mike. For the longest time when we see the characters on screen, I thought, where do they find these twin brother actors? Like, they're so amazing. Like, they're just so great, you know, playing off each other. And then I realized they're both played by the same actor.
It's the same actor,
Luca Villacis. And if I butchered his name, please forgive me. But how the whole like shows sort of how they sort of stage their scenes together. Like, you would never think it was the same actor playing both characters.
I thought it was
I
twin
should know
actors.
because now I'm watching Moon Knight at the moment, and of course you got two Oscar Isaacs on scene, but I never even... But, you know, Oscar Isaac's a
we know
actor,
that
and
Oscar Isaac doesn't
Luca
have a
is somebody
twin.
who I'm not familiar with at all. I just assumed it was two brothers who were cast in the same movie, but... I mean, two twins, but no, it's the same actor playing both roles, and he does a great job playing both characters.
Yeah.
They're very distinct that you can tell, there's a difference between Eddie and Mike when they were kids.
I had no idea. I thought this was played by twin brothers.
They were spot on. You could not tell until you looked it up afterwards for exactly that they were... Because he played it so well that they had... very distinct mannerisms despite being identical twins.
Like I really did not know that was just one actor playing the two roles, and it just done so well, as you both said. Like each, like young Mike and young Eddie are very different boys, but yeah, the way they kind of filmed it and everything was framed, like I did not pick up on that was just the one actor doing everything. And what an incredible performance from someone back then would have been, you know, quite a lot younger. And it can definitely be difficult, especially when given horror, that sometimes younger or kid performances may not hit the mark. But he was very unsettling as Eddie and very sympathetic as Mike younger. Just wow, mind blown for sure.
And I think that's another thing is Antosca and Mancini, they've definitely, with this, they like really kind of like worked their magic with the children actors, and they really use that to pay off later on for Chucky, because the kids and that are amazing. Like, incredible work from them, and so it's awesome to see them just like really first tap into the here and then just build from that, continuing through their career.
Yeah, I do need to actually watch the Chucky series as of recording. I haven't watched it yet.
Indeed.
Highly recommend it.
Yes.
Same here as well. But I also think like Craig William Macneill, who directed all the episodes in the series, and I guess that was another thing that kind of drew me to Channel Zero, because like, you know, with a lot of anthology shows, whether they are standalone or one stretch out the whole season, they always have different directors for each episode. But what I found intriguing with Channel Zero is like all 4 seasons, all of them have the same director directing each episode of that particular season. So like when we go to the next season in 2 months' time, which is the No End House, that has another director directing all the episodes. So watching like, and I think that's actually what helps make Candle Cove as a season work, because it does have that singular directing vision throughout all of it. And I have actually seen one of Craig William Macneill's films before, because he directed this film back in the mid-2000s called The Boy. And I'm not talking about the evil doll movie. There was like another movie that came out around the same time also called The Boy, that was about an evil child. And it kind of has the same kind of feel and tone as this season does. And also, since the main character of that film was, of course, a child, like he got such a great creepy performance out of that actor. And, you know, again, he works his magic here again with the child actors in this series, whether it is the main ones or even the supporting characters, because he does a good job at kind of getting all these great performances, but also finding ways to make the kids very creepy on screen in a very unsettling way, but also just getting just great performances out of so many of the actors throughout this whole season. And to me, there's not even a false note in terms of performances throughout this whole season.
Yeah, the performances are all really, really good, as we said. And yeah, when we know that the children are kind of under control, like the creepiness is so creepy and so unsettling. And then when you know like kind of who's controlling them and stuff, it's the way it plays off is really well done. But I will say, like, how we see in Candle Cove, like the pretend show or whatever you want to call it, like the puppets and stuff, they look kind of basic, they look a bit shit, let's be real. But when they actually have like these masks and costumes in the real world, I found them to be considerably more unsettling.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, especially when you see the kids wearing them, like that for me was such a good payoff to those puppets in the show when you actually see like these costumes being worn. I found that very, very unsettling. And like one of the unsettling scenes, I think it involves the character of Amy, where she sees the kids just stabbing this dummy. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, that's not okay. And then she sees them again.
In the field.
Yeah, and then she sees them again at the school practicing a play. And they're in those like masks and stuff. I found that very just, ugh, I don't like it. Go away. Creepy kids, piss off.
Yeah, no, that was, it just those two scenes, especially, her, because you know that she saw them, in the field, and now all of a sudden they're, she's alone with them in the auditorium, and they're full on like with like bigger weapons and everything.
Yeah.
She's
It's like, how did you not arrest them and just take them to jail? Because then later they then kill.
She was outnumbered. That's the
Yeah,
problem.
but then they go and they kill. Was it Melissa? Am I getting the name right?
Jessica.
Jessica, not Melissa.
Jessica,
Oh my god.
Jessica.
Yeah, and that again is very, very unsettling. And like it's such a big character death, but I almost felt like they dealt with it so nonchalantly. It was kind of weird. Like Mike finds out she's been murdered, and he doesn't even shed a tear, and it's like, but what about the kids and the husband? And he just ends up seeing the kids later and is like, oh well, it's just gonna be the three of us now. And I'm like, so nonchalant, okay? That's a bit weird.
Well, to be fair, Marcey, like I have to say, a death that was even more nonchalant is like, because in the series, Amy starts to develop with a relationship with a fellow officer. At first, it's like she's not interested, but then they had sex, and then it's like, oh, there could be possibly something there. Then he gets killed by Francis and the kids, and then his death is never mentioned again. Nobody mentions his death throughout the rest of the series. It's like it just happens, and then it's never like mentioned, like anyone knowing what happened to him. It's just like so even more nonchalant than what happens.
Yeah,
to
it's a little bit nonchalant, isn't it?
And that's one of that's the pros and the cons of, because like the last three episodes, they go so fast, and it's just like boom, 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 boom. But then again, it goes so fast that it does gloss over a lot of stuff in that time frame, which is unfortunate. But it also, it tells the story so quickly, and so it covers a lot of ground in those 3 45-minute segments. So I don't know, do we want to add extra time just to explain this part, and what would that have taken away from? Like, would that have taken away from the dream sequence, like where Mike's finally if coming in to encounter the skin taker and Eddie? Would we not have that, or that would be my concern, is like, what would it have taken away from?
Yeah, there's always that, like, if you kind of over explain things, does that kind of ruin the atmosphere of it? Yeah,
and also like one of my favorite I think how some of the scares throughout this whole series are done are just so creepy and unsettling. But one of the ones that really kind of took me aback, surprisingly having nothing to do with the Tooth Child, even though he's like terrifying beyond belief every time he's on screen, is that when Mike is in the Candle Cove world, then he sees the Skinwalker, and then for some reason the Skin Taker, sets itself on fire.
Yeah,
and it's just like, I was like taken aback because that's a terrifying image, seeing this creature on fire, but also I'm just sitting there thinking like, wow, that stunned person must be shitting themselves at the moment, because there's like bushes and everything over the Skin Taker, and because that fire is getting closer and closer to him. I'm thinking at some point they're gonna have to, like, I was terrified not just for Mike in that scene, but also just for the stunt person in the Skin Taker's costume, because it was just such just a full-on like stunt sequence.
Well, in that that kind of subverts your expectations, because in most cases like that, we would see like a scene like that in most horror movies, and then all of a sudden it would lead into a jump scare. And in this case, it just like sits there, and it's just like standing there on fire, and you're just like in dread as this thing is like smoldering down, and you're like, oh my god, this thing is just like willing to do that to itself just to get his attention and to suck him in that closer.
I feel like it's also like a representation of of burning, because like Mike is about to find out what's actually happening. He gets to see Eddie, and I feel like that kind of represents like the fire burning everything he thought he knew to this like
and he had just
chapter.
Cremated Eddie too. So it was also a representation of him just cremating, because their father had said, if they're not buried or cremated, the soul will never rest. And so Mike does that per Eddie's wish, and still it's still not at rest.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of symbolism in there.
Of course, at some point, as well as the skin taker also stabs itself in the face with
several times.
It's quite and it's just like, and that's the interesting thing about the design of the skin taker is like it kind of changes from scene to scene. Like it feels like it morphs from one design to a completely different one. Like there's no kind of definitive like look at it, because half the time I will be sitting there like, oh, it's a different creature, but it's still the same creature, just slightly either it mutilates itself or does something to it that looks different, or put on a pirate hat and other things to it so that it looks so different in every scene, which again kind of adds to the very unsettling feel to it.
Yeah, because sometimes it's taking on the guise of Jawbone, the skeleton pirate, and sometimes it's it just that whole on beast and everything that it ultimately becomes, and it's just
Indeed.
Yeah.
And there's so many creepy designs throughout this whole movie, but I mean the whole series. But the two child is definitely the one that wins out for sure.
Yeah, it's just I don't like it. I don't want to see that thing again. It's just.
I understand. My issue is eyeball torture.
Yeah, I don't like that either. Eyeballs, no.
So teeth, I can get along.
Yeah, teeth, eyeballs, brains, no. Yeah, that's it can be a little bit difficult watching a Lucio Fulci movie. I'm just saying. But yeah, that probably sort of, I guess, wraps up our discussion on Channel Zero Season 1 Candle Cove. We'll go around in a circle giving our final thoughts, anything else we needed to say, and also a rating out of 5 for the season. Bede, give us your thoughts and rating.
Yeah, well, overall, I'd give the first season of Channel Zero, Candle Cove, 4 out of 5. I really found this such a really creepy, unsettling, and just compelling show. Like, it does feel very different from any other horror anthology show that is out there. Maybe because, it has a bit more of a cinematic sheen to it, or it just feels very singular as a vision. And it just has so many creepy moments through it. And the fact that it kind of downplays everything and takes a much more subtle approach really sort of adds to it as well. Like, it's not to say that the whole season is perfect. Like I said, I think it does, it does kind of rush in with its story in the last 2 episodes. And there, of course, there are definitely questions I would have loved that it kind of dived into a little bit more. But overall, I think it's still a really compelling first season of the show. It makes me very excited to see where the next 3 seasons go in terms of how they approach their different creepypasta stories. But yeah, I definitely think that if anyone has not seen Channel Zero, definitely check this show out, and particularly the season Candle Cove. It's such a really creepy and compelling season of a show.
Excellent. Derek, your final thoughts, anything else you wanted to say, and rating out of 5?
Yeah. So for my rating, I would say a 4.5 if I'm allowed to do halves.
Yes.
It was definitely, it holds up as well. So so if you've seen it before, give it a rewatch. You'll be able to appreciate all the minute details all the more. So that's why I probably gave it that extra 0.5, because it definitely holds up. It's still creepy as hell. It will still fill you with unease. And a final thought is, it's not creepy related, but there is a found memory story on TikTok called Ships of the Northern Fleet, that is about a pirate show that everybody forgot about and is remembering, and it's a whole bunch of TikTok creators have come together and they're telling the story of the show, much like Candle Cove, that they've remembered. And it started about a year ago, and it kind of ebbed and flowed as it has gone, but it's actually hit an uptick again as Dan Povenmire, the creator of Phineas and Ferb, has recently recorded a theme song for the show. So it's fun stuff, not as creepy, but it's definitely fun to have fans come up with their own memories about a show that never actually existed.
That sounds pretty cool. So if you're on the TikTok, check that out.
Look up Ships of the Northern Fleet.
Yeah, check that out based on Derek's recommendation. And my final thoughts and rating. I give this the same score as Bede, 4 out of 5 stars. I felt this was a really compelling and interesting and intriguing 6-episode season of a show. Compelling story, a really interesting mystery, solid characters, great performances. Yeah, there's a few little minor issues here and there, but nothing that really takes away from the overall experience. And absolutely, if you haven't seen it, check it out. So obviously, this is a spoiler-heavy podcast, and the warning is in the intro. And if you haven't seen it since it came out, absolutely revisit it. I'm very glad we got to watch it. I'll probably still be thinking about it. It's just one of those weirdly haunting kind of stories. And really, really glad that we picked Channel Zero for this podcast as our next kind of show that we're diving into. So looking forward to the next episode in a couple of months where we check out season 2. So yeah, excellent stuff.
Indeed. And probably our listeners are out there probably wondering, well, wait a minute, if you're doing Channel Zero every 2 months, what are you going to do for next month's episode?
Yes, Bede, enlighten us. What will we be discussing next episode?
Indeed. So basically, this is a horror anthology podcast, Marcey. So even though we've talked mainly about TV shows for the show and talked about a movie once, which was Nightmare Cinema, we thought, you know what? We have to dive into anthology horror films. So when we're not talking about Channel Zero, we're going to be talking about not 1 but 2 horror anthology movies. And for next month's episode of this show, we're going to be talking about the horror anthology films Tales from the Crypt and The Mortuary Collection. So we're kind of mixing, say, an older anthology film with a more recent one. So we're going to pair them together and then discuss them.
Yes, and then after that, we will be back with season 2 of Channel Zero, and that format will continue until we have finished Channel Zero. And when that time happens, we will tell you what the upcoming format is, what we'll be watching next. So absolutely, now that you've heard what's coming up next for the next couple of months, it's a good opportunity to watch these things for the first time or revisit them in prep. So yes, exciting times ahead on Podcasters of Horror, if I do say so myself.
Indeed.
Sounds like a good time for sure, you guys.
Yeah.
For sure. And also thank you, Derek, for coming on the show and discussing Candle Cove with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It was a blast, and it was a great chance to revisit the series. So thanks as always, guys. Thanks.
Thank you. It was good to have the different perspective, whereas Bede and I hadn't seen it and you had before and you revisited it. So it's definitely mixes up the dynamic a little bit. And yes, everybody You can always find Podcasters of Horror on your podcast streaming app or service of choice. Just look up Podcasters of Horror or Bede, Super Marcey or Super Network. You can find us at our base of operations at supermarcey.com, and you can check out our link tree for all the links to our social media, where you can find the Super Podcast, Super Network stuff at linktr.ee/the Super Network. And if you want to find me personally and discuss Channel Zero or any other weird horror-related things or just life in general, I am on the Twitters at twitter.com/supermarcey, and you can find me on the Letterboxd under super_Marcey. Bede, where can people find you if you want them to?
If people want to find me personally, they can find me at my Twitter page at twitter.com/BedeJermyn or my Letterboxd account at letterboxd.com/BedeJermyn. And of course, you can find all my work over at supermarcey.com with all my reviews and columns.
Indeed. And Derek, if you want to self-promote, please, this is the time to do it.
For sure. I am available on Twitter and Letterboxd, both at Darathus. That's Darathus.
Easy. So be sure to follow us all on the Twitters and Letterboxd. And as we said, next time you hear us at Podcasters of Horror, it'll be a 2-film horror anthology discussion. And yes, after that, we'll be back to Channel Zero. So thank you once again, Derek, for joining us. Thank you, Bede, for being the co-host. Thank you, me, for hosting. And yes, and if anything, please try and avoid weird toothed children and weird interrupted signals of bizarre puppetry shows, everybody.
Indeed. Indeed.
Excuse me. And so long. Catch you next time, everybody.
See you, everybody. Bye.
Bye, y'all.